I'm Mark Lanigan, and welcome to this special episode of the Political Update. As you probably heard, a month ago from the 14th, 17 people died in Parkland, Florida, when a gunman entered the school grounds. A month later, citizens and politicians alike are campaigning for stronger gun control laws and more regulations on weapons. Likewise, those in opposition to gun control are meeting proponency with their own ideas. On Wednesday, March 14th, students at Medway High School walked out to mourn the victims lost. Some used the walkout to advocate gun control as well. And after school the same day, the High School Democrats of America Club hosted a political forum discussing gun control. Today, we'll be discussing two of the many sides to this argument with our two guests, Sam McEwen and Hunter Harris. Thank you both for being here. Thank you. Hunter, why don't you start? What are your views on gun control?
So I am very against the gun control systems that we have in this country right now. And what I've seen to back up my stance on this is that wherever there are strict gun laws or anti-gun reforms or gun-free zones, you see the most crime. And ever since the passing of the gun-free zone law in 1990, you see these spikes in mass shootings, and I typically correlate it with that. And I really don't favor walking into areas, especially public buildings where there's tons of people, and have no way to protect myself if some lunatic comes in and tries to hurt anyone. So that's my stance on that.
Okay, thank you. And how about Sam? What are your views?
Yeah, I'd say overall, just in general, more gun control. It can come in varied forms, but I think overall it has to come from a federal level, because in a system like the United States with different levels of government, you can move from those levels of government, so it has to come from the top down. More training required, and just sort of more from the top down, educating people about guns, more studies, and just be more upfront and clear.
Okay, thank you both. So now what about solutions? Like I know, Sam, you mentioned a couple. Hunter, what are some of your solutions to this?
Well, first off, I think we finally need to realize that we should change our policies that haven't been working for the past 30 years. We see only through the past 30 years that these tragedies have been happening. So I personally would like to see more people being able to carry guns and on their own property and on other people's property wherever they can, because typically the people who are concealed carrying or carrying in general, they are trained and they are ready and they do practice, because that's a guideline for it. You have to know what you're handling. And so I trust people who are there at the scene of, say, a potential tragedy, rather than waiting 10 minutes for law enforcement to come and pick up the bodies, basically. So I'd really like to see a change in that.
And Sam, I know you mentioned some before, but any other solutions you have?
Yes, sort of closing a lot of loopholes, whether it's the gun show loophole where you can get stuff without a waiting period, making sure that people on watch lists with the FBI can't buy guns, stuff like that, and also just sort of, once again, national stuff, because individual cities, individual states won't work if people can bring things in from other states. So as you mentioned, you need people with guns. Like, guns aren't necessarily a bad thing, but it's people who aren't trained, don't know what they're doing with firearms who are the problem. So if you're more clear, more educated, stuff like that, or you end up with better outcomes overall.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And also, but just adding on to that too, I believe that the federal government isn't doing its job in preventing certain people from getting it. Of course, we should all agree that guy in Florida should never have gotten the gun, but the only reason he got the gun was because the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the various Florida police departments and sheriff deputies and all that, and even schools, for example, they reported it, they said stuff, but nothing was done. He wasn't even put on a list. He was still able to get the gun because it's not the gun shop owner's fault. They never had any list there for them to look at and say, oh, this guy's really dangerous. He's pointing guns at people's heads. He's threatening to kill students. He's had police called to his house dozens of times. Maybe we shouldn't give him a gun. But they couldn't have known, because it's a failure on the federal government's part. It's incompetence, and I really think we need to do that instead of these massive new sweeping reforms. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, so per Hunter's point, what do you think about, I know Hunter mentioned deregulating from the federal level. What do you think about that?
I feel like in theory it's a solid idea if you can get it to work, but the problem is deregulation leads to people being able to get guns more easily, and I think overall introducing more guns won't reduce gun violence. And it's not just mass shootings that you have to think about. It's gun suicides and it's accidental gun deaths that are a massive part of this. You look at the suicide rate, guns are a massive way in doing that. And in other countries where guns just aren't as common, the suicide rate, but also the suicide fatality rate is much lower, so people are more likely to survive suicides if guns aren't involved. And most people who commit suicide and survive don't do it again, so that's a larger number of lives that aren't being lost.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's the truth in that people will always find a way to do something if they really, really have the drive to do it. And people are capable of great and terrible things. And I refuse to believe that the majority of people have hate in their heart and that aren't capable of owning this right to bear arms. But also, I feel it would be very negative on a society to make this right that they have more hard to get if other people, for example, could just illegally buy it on the street. But I get what you're saying on many aspects of that. And I also believe that instead of looking at guns as being these scary weapons in which if you have a gun on you, you should automatically be intimidated, which is what we see in the media and in all different movies and all that. We're taught to see a gun as being a deadly thing. And you know what, it is, but it doesn't fire on its own. And the person is the one who's in charge of doing that. And if people are intimidated by guns, it's really gonna prevent bad people from bringing a gun into a place where there are no guns. So if more people have guns in schools, for example, then a bad guy with a gun, they're cowards. They're not gonna wanna get shot. They wanna kill as many people as possible. So if they go in, they're going to try to think for a second, oh wait, I might get dropped before I enter the building because there's a teacher over there with a gun. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Any additional comments?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of consensus on this. People agree more on this issue than people think that they do. And we need to have a public discussion like we're doing here from both sides, and more than both sides. There's so many different opinions and views on this. So really get involved in the issue, whichever side you're on, take a stand, but be willing to change your ideas too if new ideas come forward.
Yeah, and you have to always accept or keep an open mind to solutions to the problems. And frankly, I feel that the gun control reform back in the 90s was an attempt at one of those solutions. But right now we're seeing it hasn't been successful. So in your earlier question, that's why I'm so determined to really try to fix that, try to change it for once, because something's not working and we're not trying to think of other solutions. Why not try the main one? Allow certain people and buildings to have these guns, you know?
Yeah, well, thank you both for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good job.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in. I've been Mark Lanigan, your host of the Political Update. We'll see you next time.